Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Magnifizienz, liebe Frau Kunst, lieber Herr Edenhofer, liebe Frau Künkel, liebe Frau Bulmahn, liebe Bettina König, liebe Sebastian Grieme, lieber Martin Kloss. It's a pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome you tonight after 2.5 days of intensive discussions, sharing science, sharing feelings about sustainability, sharing knowledge about sustainability, sharing ideas, sharing solutions about sustainability, and sharing the science of all this. It has been a wonderful 2 days that we spent together, I believe, and this is now something like a final focal point, this public debate where we invite people from the city of Berlin, from outside, to join with us, that we have been working for the science of the global sustainability transformation in the last 2 days. And it's my real pleasure to welcome you, especially those that are discussing tonight on stage. And I will not use much more time at the beginning of this event, but I rather would want to hand over to Martin Kloss. There is actually something that I should not forget to mention, but I will keep this as a bit of a entertainment to the end of our public debate tonight. So Martin, it's been great that you have been willing to take over this job tonight. I think it will be probably also a challenge for you, because it's interesting that those that are on stage tonight have not been with us in the conference over the last 2 days. So it appears that maybe down there's a couple of experts now, and they will probably challenge you as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to those on the stage, and have a great public debate together with us at the KOSMOS conference.
Thank you very much, Christoph. Hello, everyone. Hi. How are you? Warm, I guess. And probably a little bit tired after working, discussing for such a long time. Now, the title of this discussion is From Knowledge to Action. And it's not a question. It's a statement. Maybe it's even an imperative. And we have the knowledge, and you have discussed this knowledge for the past days. And we've had it for quite some time. I mean, let's think about it. Almost half a century ago, the first report from the Club of Rome was published in 1972. And since then, dozens of national, international reports and studies have confirmed all of these details. It's 2019. Well, we're no longer talking about the climate change that we used to see in the media. Oh, climate change is coming. We're talking about the climate crisis. We're talking about the climate emergency. And it's with that urgency that we need to use that knowledge and take decisive and, most of all, collaborative action on a global level. So the question remains, how do we do it? And who does what? Well, we now have 90 minutes to figure this out. We have roughly 60 minutes on the stage, and then we want to open it up for a discussion with you guys to take your questions and comments, and hopefully at the end have a few actionable results for us to take home. Also for us on the stage that haven't had the chance to be part of that discussion here. And with us today is our visual recording artist, Petra Schneider. Please give a warm welcome. And she will try to visually record what we will discuss. And I'll try to pick up on a few things if I see them. If I don't, you can just point at what she's doing. So I'll try to notice. Now, to get started, let me at first introduce our panel. And I want to start with Edelgard Bulmahn. She is a politician from the German Social Democratic Party. She's a former federal minister of education and research and has been a member of the German Bundestag for 30 years. Welcome. We're very happy to have you here. And this is the time. Yes. I'd like to also welcome Petra Künkel. She's a member of the Executive Committee of the International Club of Rome and the founder of the Collective Leadership Institute, a Germany and South Africa-based social enterprise working towards world sustainability. Welcome, Petra Künkel. Next, I would have introduced Daniela Jakob, who unfortunately can't be with us today due to health reasons, but we are more than happy to have a really good replacement with Bettina König as a research group leader at the Integrative Research Institute on Transformations of Human Environment Systems, the IRE thesis. I hopefully pronounced that correctly. Here at Humboldt-University, she works on new institutional and regional coordination forms for sustainable land management, very interesting, and management of integrative innovation processes. Welcome, and thank you for having me. And we are very happy to have Ottmar Edenhofer with us. He has been the lead author of the 4th IPCC assessment report on climate change. He's currently director and chief economist of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and director of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change. Welcome. And as I see so many young people here in the audience, we're very happy to also have this generation on the stage with Sebastian Grieme, who is a physics student at Potsdam University, but mostly known as a speaker for the Fridays for Future movement here in Germany. Welcome, Sebastian. Now, before we start our discussion here on stage, I want to get a general impression of the mood here in this room. And I want to ask you 2 questions. Please raise your hand if you believe that you currently have a better life than previous generations. And the panel can participate. You do? Okay, that's the vast majority. Now, the second question, raise your hand if you believe that your children and grandchildren will have a better life than you. What kind of hand gesture is that? Undecided? So, depends, okay. That was very interesting, okay. And I have 2 more questions for you at the end, and we'll see how that goes. Now, it's difficult, as you might have experienced during the past days, to tackle so many complex topics. And I would like to do it step by step and maybe talk about it in terms of tenses, starting with the past. What kind of knowledge was there? And why didn't we take any action? And then look at the present. Where do we see transformation happening? Where do we see hope in politics, in economy, in the industry, in, bless you, in society? And then look at the future. Probably most important, what are the most important actions that we need to take? And how can we actually make them a reality? Now, let me start with the national level. Mrs. Bulmahn, in 1987, the German government established a commission of inquiry, a so-called Enquete Commission, for the protection of Earth's atmosphere. And in 1990, the second report of this commission concluded deforestation of rainforests needs to be stopped by 2010. Dramatic pause. And reforestation completed by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Now, the final report 30 years ago, had very concrete measures and actions for a 1.5-degree limit. Greenhouse gases need to be reduced by 1/3 until 2005. and another third by 2020. Now, that's just one of the many examples, but I just wanted to take a national example of the huge gap between the decisions that were actually made, not only discussions, but actual decisions and recommendations, but very few actions. And for you, having been in politics for such a long time, where do you see the reasons for this gap between knowledge and action? Oh, please use the microphone. Thank you.
Let me start with a positive action which was taken. You just reminded us of the report of the Inquiry Commission, which was given to the Parliament in 1999. In 1999, 3 months after we were in government, I was a member of this government, we introduced an eco-tax. We introduced a tax by which we increased the tax of oil and electricity by 2%. And at the same time, we started a so-called 1,000 roof program by which we gave money to the individual person, but also to industry in order to set up and to build up a solar industry. This so-called 100,000 roof program really was a step from research to production and innovation and development of production technology. And then, 3 years later, we also introduced a system which was singular in Germany, by which we increased again the price for electricity and used the money which was the income of the government in order to support the individual as well as companies in order to set up solar panels on the roofs. So that's why I still have hope, because I myself have experienced it can be done. And I always think of Albert Einstein. He always said it's not enough to know, you must want to do it, and it's not enough to want to do it, you must do it. And that's the point. And that is true for the individual. And look at yourself. And I think that is one of the reasons why, after these steps we took in the government, in the Schröder government, why after these steps there was very little progress, to say it very seriously. When you look at your own behavior, I think there is a contradiction in your own behavior between what you know and how you should change your behavior and what you are actually doing. If you really look critical at your own behavior, then you realize that each of us, I would almost say each of us, does not do it to such an extent as we know we should do it. And that has different reasons. That is, people tend to change their behavior slowly. And that is why it's so important that for example, young people finally raised their voice. I was really waiting for that, because I always said they are the ones who are really affected drastically, more than I will be affected in my lifespan. You will be more affected, much more drastically, and you should raise your voice. I mean, I belong to that generation who raised their voice in the late 80s, late 60s, and in the 70s. And of course, it changed something. And I think that is important. You always need a movement in society in order to support those who really want to change the situation. And that is true for, I think, individual behavior as well as politics and society. Second point, when we are honest, and I think that's crucial, then of course we know that transformation of our way of living is costly. And we should talk about it. How can we do it? Because when I say it's costly, I don't mean that we shouldn't do it. I think we should do it in such a way that it's possible and that it's practical without, taking 10 years' time until we start with that. Thirdly, I think we are, at the moment we are talking about, again, about tax, emission certificates, but we should also talk about technical norms and standards. Because as a Minister for Science and Research, I'm very favorable also of technical norms and standards, because then you have a huge effect very quickly. And I miss that discussion. I think the young people should take up this discussion, because technologically we can do much more than we do at the moment. And then you have better arguments also in order to make sure that we are not only talking about costs, we are really talking about changing our industry, changing our standards, and that is also important. So just a few points.
Oh, so many things about this. I will touch back on a couple of things later, but first I just want to stay with the leadership question and the public sector. You get the chance in a minute. Just let me redirect the question to Ms. Künkel. You're a leadership expert. Would you say that the leaders, yeah, you can finish your thought in a second. Just, would you say that the leaders have neglected to take really decisive action based on the knowledge that they had? I mean, you give seminars and workshops, you teach people how to lead, and is that a question of the leaders that we had on a national, even on a global level? And we hear from, you said there were a lot of starting points, but when we see where we are today, we're nowhere near where we should be. Do you agree?
That is right. I think as a leader, you have to be courageous. That is very often uncomfortable, and I know what I'm talking about, because I undertook a lot of changes in our research system which were not very comfortable for me when I was a minister. But I think you have to be courageous, that's right, and sometimes, to be honest, I miss some of the courage, yes.
So, yeah, as a leadership expert, or I would say as a collective leadership expert, so it's about how to do things together. I would say there is a serious level on overcoming the ego and overcoming the being locked into the also societal incentive systems that we have. And that often is connected to being locked in power structures, you know, where you act in a certain way. You can go to companies at the C level and kind of 2 levels below, how people are actually captives. I'm not saying victims, I'm saying captives of a power system that lets them act in a certain way. This is very, very difficult to step out. This is no apology. You can step out of that. And there are quite a lot of leaders who do step out. And I believe both in politics as well as in NGOs as well as in companies, there are a lot of individuals who would like to make a difference. I find that there is not really a supportive environment for them. So they're often, as I said, you know, captives of the system. And the second thing that I find interested, they are disconnected. So often it's very individualized that, you know, I would like to do things differently, but I don't know if my colleague, you know, if I could talk with my colleague about this. So I think there is a need to really connect leaders, both within institutions as well as across institutions, which is extremely important. But this is just one part of the story. So the individual change in being able to make a difference is often contradicted by, you know, by the larger system that I'm operating in, you know, in my municipality or in my organization or in my political party or in my industry or whatever. So I do think one needs to look at, and that is probably missing at the moment, one needs to look at how can transformations happen, and that is, and I fully agree with you that there is a lot of experience on how transformation actually happened in the past, both from political leadership as well as industry leadership. But it's almost like it's in, you know, it's in the fog. People don't, not even science pulls out what has worked. And that is quite interesting because it hasn't been pulled out of what worked. You know, if you looked at historical transitions, transformations, kind of political-induced, NGO movement-induced transitions, there is so much data. You know, and we were here in a university. There's so much data that is not worked with. That's not really, or at least, you know, I haven't seen a major kind of publication on that to say this is what worked and we pulled out the success factors. So I think it is extremely important to equip people with capacities that come from successful transformations and say, it worked then, it can work now, please do A, B, C, D, E. And the next level, and that is probably, you know, a very, very contentious issue. I think we need to ask the question, what can be done within the current neoliberal system? And what can be done there? Yes, and there's a lot we can do, but it's also clear whether we will meet the boundaries of the neoliberal system. So we are up for a big, big shift, and we cannot wait for that shift, you know, in order to be, you know, able to act. But we need to keep in mind that we are up for a major transition, and we need to look at where are alternative economic strategies, economic models, where are they emerging? Because they are emerging, you know, from shared economy to well-being economy to circular economy, and connect these dots and not be locked in kind of my circular economy community or my shared economy community, but bring these together into a discourse and say what works, what doesn't work, and what are the leverage points that we can really go for in order to operate towards the big shift.
But is it really a question of systems? I mean, you talked about being captives of the system, and you, as a young generation, you said, well, I mean, F that, we don't want to be captives of any system anymore. We'll just take the action into our own hands. We'll just be visible to everyone because we're here. And a lot of this happened before you were born, before this generation was even on the planet, but it was caused by a system that was partly in place a long time ago, but some of these systems were still in place. So there's either an evolution or at some point there will be a revolution if the system can't evolve any further. I mean, and you wanted to comment on what Ms. Bulmahn said.
Yeah, sure. So first I wanted to comment on you when you said that we saw actions that worked out, but the problem is they didn't work out fast enough, and by far not fast enough, and they were not able to transform our systems away from the bad path we were steering. And perhaps to comment on that we obviously have to change our system. Yes, but the problem is not to change it. The problem is to change it fast enough in order to prevent warming to exceed 1.5 degrees. And so coming back to questions about complex issues and alternative models, I think we are not in a position to think that through now. Until we have a consensus in 2050, we have to act now with the measures we know now. And we don't have, it's not the time to wait until we have an absolute solution for example, circular economy or alternative economic models. We have to start working within the system we are in now, and we will see where this leads us. And we have measures to take that can lead us away from our destructive pathway we are on now, being, for example, CO2 taxation or greenhouse gas taxation as a whole. That will automatically force new models and will stimulate competition about alternative models. We don't have to wait until we have worked that out, because if we wait until then it's probably too late.
Mr. Edenhofer, why are we having this discussion now in 2019? I mean, last year, about a year ago, the last report of the IPCC said there is a chance to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees if we can reduce greenhouse gases by 45%. I mean, it's a really big number, 45% until 2030. That's only 10 years from now. So what happened in the past? Shouldn't we have this discussion like 20, 30 years ago?
In the beginning of my statement, I intend to play the big pessimist here. In the end, I might agree a little bit with you that there is some hope. But from my point of view, by and large, we should acknowledge we simply failed. And I'll give you a few examples. We have produced much more efficient cars, but the cars become heavier and we are driving more. So this is all about the rebound effect. And therefore, I would like to see a model which is in a position to mitigate the rebound effect. number one. Second, no, I strongly disagree with that, and I come back to that. The rebound effect cannot be mitigated by technology standards alone. And this is something which I disagree, but I don't want to push this argument too much. But my argument is, we have the wrong knowledge. So we have the impression that we have a huge knowledge stock and only little action. The reason why we made no progress is we have not the appropriate knowledge for action. We don't know what worked in the past and what did not work. And this is something we should take into account much more precisely. And let me explain this a little bit, what I mean, at least for 3 areas. The first one is, if you read, and this is also self-criticism, if you read the IPCC, in fact, the IPCC is not talking about measures. The IPCC is talking, like the Enquete Commission, about goals. We are very good to formulate goals. When I was at co-chair of IPCC, even Saudi Arabia agreed that we should have 0 emissions by mid of century. You can talk with everybody about goals. Everybody agrees on goals. The big debate is, and the interesting debate is, when it comes to the means. And here is the disagreement. So when I try to say in the IPCC, we should remove the subsidies for fossil fuels completely in the next 10 years, so basically I had in front of me almost 100 nation states and governments say, no, this cannot be done. But by 2050, 0 emissions, this is an easy task. So when you want to understand how serious is somebody, don't ask him about the goals, ask him about the measures and ask him about the means. So that's my first statement. And here we have to acknowledge we simply failed. We failed. We haven't the right measure at hand so far. And let's have a discussion about this. The second aspect. When we talk about deforestation, what happened now at the Amazonian region, when we talk about climate change, how to mitigate climate change, we have to acknowledge this is all about collective action. It's all about collective action. Nation states have to cooperate. Within the European Union, we have to cooperate. And to be honest, we are not very good to understand under what specific circumstances collective action works. So in your last question, or your question was, I didn't answer your question so far because I want to say something about my pessimistic mood. But now I come to answer your question. So why do we have this debate now? And I see 2 reasons. The first one, and I don't say this because Sebastian is here, it's Fridays for Future. And I can tell you, I spent almost 10 years to talk to the politicians about this issue, not about only with the environmental politicians, but with finance ministers and so on. And basically, all of them, by and large, had the feeling that the Amazonian rainforest, climate change is a minor issue. It's not important at all, or at least all other things are more important. When Friday for the Future started, so in December last year in Katowice, I was there and everybody told me, oh, you know, we cannot take action. It's the Yellow Vest movement in France. We cannot afford this in Germany. It's all about the right-wing populism, and this is something which is very, very dangerous. Everybody talks about this. Then Fridays for the Future came, and basically in most of the parties and the party leaders, I had a conversation with them, they become very, very concerned what these young people are doing on the street, right? Because these are nice people. They would like to see these people as their daughters and their sons, and so this has a deep impact on the party leaders. And the second thing was, and this is a little bit an irony why we have this debate in Germany now, this is because of the European Union. At one day, an environmental minister signed an agreement which at this time nobody had a clue what does this mean. And this is a very bureaucratic term, and it is called the European Effort Sharing Regulation. Nobody cares about this. Last year, the government realized that the Effort Sharing Regulation requires a reduction of emissions of 38% in the transport sector, in the building sector, and in the agriculture sector. And the nice thing is, if Germany or another EU member state cannot fulfill this target, it has to pay by and large a penalty. So it is in the budget of the finance minister. Civil society and financial investments together and financial incentives together create an atmosphere where we can now talk about what, from my point of view, is fundamental. Not just about carbon pricing, not just about carbon taxation. It's about what kind of financial policy, what kind of fiscal policy, what kind of tax policy we need for sustainable development. And now we have a debate in corners which never take care on all these issues. And this is, from my point of view, a major achievement. My hope is now that we can use this momentum not to continue a debate about wonderful targets in 2050. This is also important. But now to have a decent debate about the means, have a decent debate with the vested interest groups, have a decent debate with the politicians, have a decent debate. So what is the short-term entry point to change the situation? And my last statement is the following. I heard we are not fast enough. No, that's not true. That's simply not true. We are not at track at all. Emissions at a global scale are rising, rising, and rising with a growth rate of 3%. We are investing like hell, globally in coal-fired plants. In Germany, we have built after 2011, 10 coal-fired plants. We are a coal-dependent country. Our emissions are double that of Poland. There is no need and no more legitimacy of us to finger point to Polish people, not to China. Let's sort this out in Germany, right? This is what we have to do. Okay, so that's, and the last thing what I would like to emphasize is, and now I would like to end the first statement a little bit on an optimistic mode. Let's think about the following. We have now a decade ahead of us, and we cannot afford to lose this decade again. The last decade was almost a lost decade, full stop. The next decade we cannot afford to lose. Now let's think about the following. We could come up with a reasonable, decent European climate policy. A combination of taxes, emissions trading, and also standards can play a role. But by and large, we do this collectively at the European scale. Let's then think, over the next decade, we will be able to cooperate closer with China. And I deeply believe that Donald Trump will not sustain forever. That's my most important hope. And if this is the case, that we might facilitate a reasonable cooperation between China, United States and Europe. Other countries may join. So this is, for me, a vision where we can see that at a global scale we can change. But this change is needed. But what I would like to highlight is this is an unprecedented change. We have never done in economic history, never done in industrial history, such a huge transformation. And this is something which requires a lot of courage, but it requires also a lot of knowledge. We should be honest with us, and we should analyze very carefully what worked, what will work, what could work, and then evaluate ex post what's the outcome of this. And let's do this in an honest way. And this is a very modest role of science, and I think scientists can play a reasonable role, a humble, a very modest role, but this is what we can do. And with that, I have a little bit hope, but before we start to agree on the hope, we should acknowledge and agree that the last decade was a lost decade, we failed, and this cannot happen again.
Yeah, I strongly agree on most points, especially the point that we have to act now, and that we have no time to wait, and especially that we have no time to say, okay, let's build an emissions trading system in 3 to 4 years. This is not how it worked. This is how we failed doing this transformation the last decades, by proponing action all the time and not taking the measures that could be taken now. This is my first point. The second point is, I think it's crucial that we that we see climate change and the climate crisis as the top major subject in politics. And I think this is something good we have changed, because I disagree that we can do climate politics just under the carpet, like just naming it like some issue besides some others. This doesn't work. This is basically the reason why we failed the last decades, because we thought we could introduce climate policy and life would go on just the way it was before. And this is not true. And we all know that this is not true because so much has to change. And so the first step is that we totally focus on climate change in every measure we take, and that politics is focusing on climate change, and that political debates are focused on climate change. Because this is the only possibility how we can set in all these measures in such a short time we only have left to prevent warming to exceed 1.5 degrees and to implement a working policy that decreases greenhouse gas emissions fast enough. And I think a point where I'm a bit more skeptical is like putting as a first step to building coalitions with China and the USA and within the European Union. I don't know if you meant it like that, but I think we don't have time for that either. Because if we have a look at the figures, the 45% figure until 2030 was a number which was in relation to 2010. 2017 speaking, we are at 55% until 2030. This is a number, and even higher today because emissions have risen the last 2 years. So these are numbers that if you think clearly about these, they are simply crazy. And so we can't afford to wait even the slightest bit of time, and obviously not to wait until we get Donald Trump out of office. And so what we have to do now is to focus on that, what we can do now. And what we can do now is act within this nation. And that means that Germany has to implement environmental and climate politics that are consistent with the 1.5 degree warming limit, no matter what other nations do. And of course this is a challenge, because for example you get problems with companies that are under strict carbon pricing and so on. But this is a challenge we have to face, and we have to be willing to make small, well, at least medium sacrifices there, because climate change is the biggest challenge of our time, and if we fail, the consequences will be disastrous, and I don't have to tell this to you. So I think the focus should be what we can do now and here, and within our range of power. I think this must be the focus now.
Thank you. I just wanted to connect to what you said, that we need to talk about the measures, and I wanted to ask you, Ms. König, let's talk about the different sectors, starting with maybe agriculture, because that's your field of expertise. And you know, global population has doubled in the past 50 years, and land use for food production especially has increased dramatically. And agriculture alone is responsible for almost a quarter of global CO2 emissions. Now, from your point of view, what went wrong in the past, and what could we do now? And as Sebastian said, on a national level, does it even matter, or do we need to think globally in general? What are the measures that make a difference?
First of all, I want to say I feel a little bit old, because when I entered science, there were so many measures proposed already, and some of them they are on the table again, and they are not really innovative. And it does not really work out. So I'm a little bit puzzled about this, because I do not feel so old. One example, a measure that contributes to the well-being of all of us is very simple. Eat more fruit and vegetable, and I have a background in horticultural economics. And what went wrong? No one listened to this. So this is very old, and there's very old campaigns also by the EU, 5 a day. So it goes to the very small routines of our everyday lives, and these need to be connected to the global models. And we have really difficulties in really connecting this. And this is one of the challenges I see. so some of the measures are already there. They are not so. Sometimes we do not have to reinvent the wheel, and it's very surprising for me that this gets so much attention, because colleagues of mine who've been working in the field, who are doing research on how to market more sustainably produced food, they never got the attention in the last years, and they have been saying this for a long time. So it was there. No one has listened, maybe because it was not packed or packaged as nicely as it should be. So maybe this one needs to be changed, to change the package of research, so that the message gets across.
But think about it as a measure of, either we use it as a measure for ourselves, we have to change our lives, we have to change our routines. At the same time, when you think of it on a global level, do we need measures in terms of regulatory environments? Like, why are we still today importing soy and beef from deforested Amazon lands? Why are we doing that when we know that Brazil is basically, committing these crimes every day, and we're still making a profit of it? So why is this happening? Is it then the responsibility of politicians that they have to stop that? Do we have to march the streets and say, stop it, please? Or what has to happen?
Yes, of course, it's a matter of incentives. It's a matter of, do you earn money with this, in doing this? The other day I was in a conference, and there was a farmer woman, and she was coming there and saying, well, now these people are all discussing, and we have a pig farm, and my son wants to enter, and if he wants also to make a living out of it, we have to invest, and we have to have more pigs to make our living as a family. So, and I wanted to get an answer there, but these discussions, and she was really emotionally touched by this question, because it's tricky. It's also for farmers. Should they be blamed for that? And it's more a matter of, is this discourse that we are having really useful for those who are working on the solutions already? And my research in the last years has shown me no. They are working in this field between knowledge and action, and it's like the desert. So it's this, what we are discussing is very slowly only transferring into resources for them. They're small and medium-sized enterprises. They do not have a lot of resources. The leaders, as you said, they are not connected. How should they organize themselves? So it's not that there is not anything there. There's solutions all over, also in the agricultural field. But to really come to a solution is that is coming out of the niche also needs the framework conditions.
So is it a question of implementing these solutions? I mean, there's so many...
May I add one thing? I think we have one problem, and that is not only true for Germany, that's true for other countries as well. We have, for example, a very specialized science, a very specialized research system. So we have very good scientists, very convincing research results, but they are all results of specialist researchers. And what is missing is this coherent view. If you say very, very ambitious, a holistic view. And when we are talking about measurements, I'm talking always about measures, because it's not, as I said, it's not enough to know, you have to take measures. And then, of course, you can only take measures successfully if you not only take a single measure, but if you look at the whole system. And that is very difficult, not only in science. When I look at the science reports, they are usually specialized science reports for one single field, for one topic. But that is also true for politics, and not only in the government, but also in the parliament. And so, yes, you are right, there is a need for much more communication, but not only on the oral level, but on the working level. That is the important point. And that's why I wouldn't say that the measures were not taken quick enough. I would say we have a lost decade. The last 10 years were lost. That's right. And I would say it's not enough to start a transformation of our way of living and then to do it only for 6 or 7 years. We undertook this transformation for 7 years and then it was stopped. And that's not enough. We are talking about a long period. And not only about the lifetime of one generation, we are talking about a long period. But the crucial point really, I think, is that we are not used to work in such a way that we are already in our work when we are discussing measurements, and you are right when you have to look at the past and so on, but we have to cooperate right from the beginning, and our society is not organized in such a way. That makes it difficult, to be honest. And this doesn't mean that it will take years and years and years, but it's necessary in order to be successful, otherwise you will fail.
So how do we do it? Ms. Künkel, you've been waiting for such a long time.
Just wanted to kind of add on to what you said on collective action. I do think we need the conditions, we know the conditions for collective action. It's just, there is a lot around. But this, of course, is not the world of politicians, and it's not the world of science, it's the world of practitioners. And I think we really need to look and harvest the knowledge on collective action. It's possible, Fridays for Future is one example for collective action, but there are many multi-stakeholder initiatives on the international level, on the German level, on regional level. And these may take time, but these will stabilize different kind of collaboration structures in the long run. But I also want to point out one aspect that I find important, because we tend to always talk about what politicians can do or what maybe CEOs can do. And I think it's we had in one of the SGs at the Treasures, we had clearly said we need top-down and bottom-up approaches. And it's absolutely clear they need to be connected, they shouldn't be disconnected, but we need to connect bottom-up approaches. And I found it so interesting yesterday, just before this conference, I found, I'm living in Mecklenburg in a small municipality. I found my municipality and asked the municipality, as this is Mrs. Künkel speaking from this and this village, and just question, do we have, as our municipality, do we have a climate crisis strategy? Yeah, but maybe I can connect you to the deputy mayor. Okay, same question to the deputy mayor. So, deputy mayor, but we don't use glyphosate anymore in our municipality for the municipality grounds. I said, fantastic, really, absolutely great. But is there a strategy in place? No. And I would say in 2019, no municipality in Germany and in no other country in the world can afford to not have a climate crisis strategy. And of course, things cannot be solved on the local level. But I would encourage all of us to think, what can we do in our own communities? And this is not about just kind of little projects and self-reflective circles. These may also be important. But what can we do ourselves in bottom-up approaches to get the issues, and the major issues are clear. It's sustainable agriculture, it's sustainable energy systems, it is carbon-free mobility, it is, not to forget about it, social inclusion and social equity, and it is about the management of natural resources. And these points are clear, and they are not so difficult to translate into actions that may be different from municipality to municipality, from country to country, but at least they can be done.
I would like to respond to you, and you said basically the proposals are not new at all. And we should not reinvent the wheel. My argument would be we haven't invented the wheel. That's the problem. That's the problem. It's not about the reinvention of the wheel, but we have to come up with measures which really works. And so far, we should basically say, we should analyze carefully what's the precise reason why we failed. And here's one, for me, one important aspect here. And this is basically the gross underestimation of the importance of government. We had now basically 2 decades behind us where almost everybody says, oh, government is weak. Government has no influence. Government is powerless because of globalization. And this is deeply wrong. And I would like to show you an example, which is not a nice one. This is Donald Trump. Donald Trump has changed basically tariffs. If you are not an economist, tariffs are incredibly boring. But he has changed the tariffs, and now we are at the crossroad of a great recession. I'm not saying he did the right thing. What I'm saying is it emphasizes, it shows how important government politics is. And my last point, and this is also self-criticism. So you might heard about, or you have seen, the large IPCC report on land use change. Wonderful. This report shows what is the basic, why we as scientists are so peculiar. We are really very good to describe a problem. But this report almost ignores the white elephant in the room. And what is the white elephant in the room? It's the European Common Agricultural Policy. It is almost completely silent about this. And why do we not discussing this? And what worries me is, and this is why I like so far Fridays for Future, we have a tendency to say, what can I do? We should say, what can we do? What can politicians do? I basically vote for politicians to solve collective action problems, hopefully with my input, but nevertheless, this is this is their mandate. And from my point of view, because we are here in Humboldt, and I would like to quote Goethe. Goethe said some times ago, tu das Rechte nur in deinen Sachen, der Rest wird sich von selber machen. This is misleading. At least in this century, this is completely misleading. And therefore, I like what Fridays for the Future did to address the politicians, not to blame politicians, but to emphasize the responsibility of the politicians. And we have to acknowledge changing political problems is a time-consuming task, very difficult. But this is what we have to do. If we want to get rid of the land use problems about biodiversity, then we have to talk about the common agricultural policy again. And we have to acknowledge that this is not a wheel at all. It is, we are stuck with this policy, and we have now to find a way out. And it's not a big utopia. This is just to fix a big problem.
Yeah, this is another example why sometimes I feel a little bit old, because this is, has been discussed with the first pillar and the second pillar, and then the second pillar of the Common Agricultural Policy. We have lots of measures to support young farmers, to support them in developing solutions. The countries do not implement these measures which the European Union offers in their national programs or in the regions, so it's very heterogeneous across Europe. And there's a long debate, and it's a silent debate. What do we do with the first pillar? Exactly. So this is, yeah. And another thing is, this is the power about discourses. Also politicians are influenced by that. It's not only that the actors are influenced by discourses, but also politicians are influenced in believing, well, we do not have any power anymore.
Yeah, I extremely strongly agree with the words of Mr. Edenhofer, because politics has extremely much power here, and individuals are not able to solve the climate crisis, and are obviously not able to solve it fast enough. So if we talk about individuals taking action on climate, then this individual would have to know what exactly is good for the climate and what is bad. And we have a few problems there, basically being that not every individual can inform herself so much until she knows everything to conclude whether this material for building a house would be more climate friendly, or this small measure, or this. This is not possible, and we have a lack of transparency showing which measure would be more climate friendly. But this would also not solve the problem, because not every individual has the time and the knowledge to solve this problem, and we won't get there, because the issue is so complex, and this leaves only politics to solving the problem. And so politics is entirely responsible for solving the climate crisis. And I think what is crucial about this is, as I already pointed out, that we have this focus on climate crisis, that every politician has to discuss it, that every politician has to think about it, and that we have to work out solutions for this, because I don't see another way to find solutions fast enough in order to combat climate change. And this will surely not work over the individual. The individual has the responsibility to vote for climate-friendly parties which would focus climate action. This is the responsibility of the individual, and the responsibility is to push for action. But I don't see that individuals can solve this problem, and we have to solve this problem. And so government action is crucial and must be the key. And so there's no excuses for not acting or blaming individuals, or even saying, well, we have a free market system, everybody would be able to choose a more climate-friendly product. No, because we are lacking knowledge and transparency, and we don't get there, and so politics has to solve the problem.
This is always
Can I disagree slightly?
Yeah.
And I fully agree with the strategy for Fridays of Future to make this the major point, to address the responsibility of politics and politicians, and even at the personal level, and really to concentrate on the climate crisis. Fully agree. But if you look at the transformation that needs to happen, we cannot wait for politicians to act. We need to push them, we need to put them under pressure, we need to do everything that they do their job. But at the same time, many other people need to act. And this is not about what kind of insulation do I put into my house. This may be kind of part of a little story, But what do I do in my community? What do I do in my municipality? In what kind of networks am I active? And what is it that companies and medium-sized companies can do? What are the narratives that need to be accompanying a story of possibility? So I agree that as a strategy for Fridays of Future, great. But for everybody else, don't just wait for politicians to act and see, when this happens, then maybe we can start doing something.
I think I would include this in... pushing for more sustainable policies, but the problem is simply that we can't summon so huge parts of society behind eating more climate-friendly diets or buying more solar power because they believe it's the right thing to do. We can't wait for that, and we can't expect that to reduce emissions. We can do this, and it's good to do this in order to increase pressure on politics, but the focus has to be that measures are implemented that push society by itself to a more climate-friendly habit, because we lack the knowledge, as I already said, and we lack the courage in large parts of society. So where we have to get other people to, and I probably missed out on this a few minutes ago, is that we are willing to take this transformation, and that we are willing to have these policies being implemented. And we need a lot of discussion in society about that. And everybody is responsible for talking to neighbors, friends, and so on, and explain the urgency of the situation. But the measures have to come from politics and not from individuals primarily.
So far I hear a lot of generalizations. We're shifting responsibilities. I hear a lot of buts. Let's try to get a little more concrete measures to talk about. I have an example. For a little over 20 years, I've been traveling a lot in Germany, across Europe for work. I never fly. I only take the train. I love the trains, but I also do it for environmental reasons. In these 20 years, I've spent a little over 3 times the amount I would have spent using airplanes. And within these 20 years, I've never been able to find out why that is, why Deutsche Bahn was not able to give me a ticket for at least the price that the airline is offering it, or turn it around and put taxes on the kerosene and make flying more expensive. It's just one tiny example, and that leads us to a measure like, what do we do with CO2? Okay, let's talk about measures for CO2. We have the ETS. It's not working. They gave away certificates. It's the emissions trade as it is right now doesn't work. What with CO2 tax? Is it a measure that would make sense? Put a real tax on every single product? How does it affect every person then when they buy the products? So let's try to find out concrete measures as opposed to try to find out who's responsible for them, but really talking about what are the effective measures, where's the leverage, what does have an impact. Maybe Mr. Edenhofer, you're the right person to talk to.
Before I come to my favorite topic, carbon pricing, let me say, let me say something a little bit more fundamental. I think we are living, you said, in a neoliberal system, or we could say we are living in a market society, and all these things can only function when we are basically respecting and agree that in the prices, or the prices should reflect the costs, the real costs. And if you analyze our daily life with that lens, you immediately realize that basically if you go to the supermarket, most of the products you buy do not reflect the full costs, do not reflect the true scarcity. So I see a lot of agreement. So when I talk to the politicians, most of the time they do not agree with me. They say this is a very strange statement. And why should we make our life more costly? And then my response is always, we had already a large-scale experiment where a whole economic system tries to ignore the most fundamental scarcity. This was basically in Eastern Europe. And this economic experiment deeply failed because they subsidized the wrong things, they taxed the wrong things in a way which does not reflect the true scarcity and the true costs and the prices. And my argument is, in the 21st century, what is the most important scarcity factor? What is the most important scarcity factor in the 21st century? The most important scarcity factor are our global commons. The atmosphere, the ocean, the forests. And if you analyze what we are paying for that forests can be restored, we can stop deforestation, basically in our daily life, in the meat, in the milk, so this does not reflect the true scarcity. So this is a very fundamental thing, and therefore I argue and say the well-being in the 21st century depends on how we manage our global commons. And this is, for me, one of the greatest challenges for the 21st century. We are not running out of fossil fuels. The fossil fuels are not the scarcity factor. It's the atmosphere, it's the ocean, it's the global commons. And how to manage this in a world where we basically have to deal with a Brazilian president who basically ignores this issue, and a US-American president who says, I do not care about this. This is really a huge challenge. But we have to make clear, and we have to make it visible in the global society that basically the management of the global commons is the fundamental, one of the most fundamental requirements for the well-being of the 21st century. That said, here I would like to argue that in that general terms everybody might agree, not everybody, but most of the people agree. When it comes then to the concrete measurements, and we realize that basically our daily life becomes more expensive in many respects, not in all the respects. Basically, they are then the problem becomes really problematic. And here I would like to start with a second important aspect, which requires a new debate. When basically we price our products according to the carbon content, according to the real scarcity factors which matter in the 21st century, and life becomes much more costly, then we have to agree, to acknowledge that it becomes costly in particular for the low-income households. Because the low-income households are consuming on their expenditure much more carbon-intensive goods, for example. So in that sense, we can only solve that problem if we can agree in our society that justice needs a much higher priority. We cannot start to price carbon. I'm known as really a proponent of carbon pricing, but we cannot do this if we have not measurements to support the low-income households. And this can be done, but this is very important, and this is a very complementary measurement. And therefore, I would say we cannot afford just to talk about ecological issues. We cannot afford just to talk about the global commons. That's very important. We have to talk also about, to emphasize the priority of social justice. Otherwise, we will end up simply nowhere. So, and if you ask me, basically, then the question, should we basically implement a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme? This is a fairly technical issue. And I'm happy to discuss this, but before I do this, I want to make sure that we are on the same wavelength on the general picture.
May I remind you that when we first introduced the first CO2 tax in 1999 on gas and electricity, for example, electricity produced by energy was excluded out of this tax. We also, at the same time, and that is my point why I say we should remember that it worked already. We also, at the same time, cut down the pensions contributions. And that is a real help for the low-income people, because cutting down tax doesn't help them because they don't pay tax anymore. When you look at the statistics, who's paying tax, of course, the real low-income families don't pay tax. So you have to look at other costs of the family where you can really try to equalize and to create a new balance. And I totally agree. That's why I gave this example. And I'm sometimes really, to be honest, a little bit angry, because we have some good examples how you can do that. And you have to do it, because then you really take care of that group who really needs it essentially. The second point, of course, we are talking about minimum wages. We can't afford these minimum wages. We have to, at the moment, we have to increase the minimum wages if you really want to make sure. And I really want that, and I support that the cost reflects the real cost of a product. And I think I do. Tickets for an airplane at the moment don't reflect the real cost, because we subsidize, for example, airports to a large extent, which is crazy, to say it very clearly. And that is only one example. So if you want to make sure that the price really reflects the real cost, then you have to take measurements which make sure that those who are really dependent and who have very small income are not deprived much more than they are already at the moment. And otherwise we will end with the German Trump, and I don't want that, to be honest.
Sometimes it appears to me that the discussion is wrong in itself. Like when a family now can buy a piece of meat, say a beef steak in the supermarket for €1, and with the real price taxed in, they would have to pay €5. But now or even 10, doesn't matter, and now they're eating it every single day. Do we want them to keep eating that piece of meat every single day? That's right. So
they have to pay more for
it has to go.
They have to pay more for meat. They have to pay more for electricity. But you have to keep the balance. That's the point, and you have to keep that in mind. And that's why I so urgently plead for coherent measurements. And not only to look at one single point, but to look at other aspects as well. No, it's a political. Of course, it's a political issue.
I disagree strongly. I disagree strongly. No, I disagree, not strongly. I disagree that the eco tax reform you did was a success story, and I'm not saying this because I want to.
At the beginning, it was But not on the long run.
Yeah, but let me explain why I don't believe that, and then you can respond. So I'm not saying this, I don't want to blame you, because we can learn a lot from that. The first thing was, the tax reform has taxed electricity, not CO2. So that was the first, no, it was, basically the electricity tax has survived. And the electricity tax, and it was not a tax on the carbon content. And if you look at the energy taxes we have in Germany, outside the EU emissions trading scheme, this has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with the carbon content. What we need is a fundamental energy tax reform.
But that's not a contradiction. I said that was a starting point. I don't want to repeat the same measurements we took 20 years ago. So that's not my point. But I want to give an example that you can do something in a very short time, but you have to keep going to do this and not stop it after a couple of years, or not continue this track after a couple of years. You have to continue. A second point, we are much more well informed, and I think there is I would say not 90% and not 100% of the population, but that's not necessary. You don't need 100% or 90%. You need a strong group, and you need a majority in the political process, and you can organize that for measurements which are taken. In the last legislative period, we had a so-called, was at the end of 2019 up to 2013, we had a so-called future inquiry mission, where we always made a lot of proposals how to prevent rebound effects, for example. So we have a lot of concrete proposals what can be done, but again, it must be a coherent concept for politics. Otherwise, it doesn't work, because then you always have rebound effects already in the political process. And so it doesn't change our whole economy. And I'm talking about the transformation of our economy, and also partly about the transformation of our way of life. I have no illusion about that. But I think we have to do it. So again, let's not discuss, and repeat these discussions where you talk not about the real core of maybe disagreement. Let's discuss how it can be done, and I think that is really important.
Okay, let's agree to disagree for now. One quick last statement, and then I want to open it up for your questions and comments, because we're running out of time otherwise. Okay, Sebastian.
Yeah, so I'm very glad that this social debate came up now, because I think this is a debate where we are making mistakes at the moment, because we are not able to convey the message in society that a CO2 tax could be implemented totally just by only having like a very small amount of people being like Härtefälle, but the huge majority of poor people having to pay less than before by implementing per capita refund or electricity tax cuts. So, and the message we have to convey is that this can be done, and this will be done socially just. And I don't see this message being conveyed right at the moment, because, and I think this is a point where scientists also have to get a little bit better, perhaps, because I don't see the voices of science at the moment in the public debate calling that a CO2 tax could be just. What I hear is Peter Altmaier claiming one day after 3 papers came out who exactly proved this one thing, that a CO2 tax could be implemented socially just, claiming that a CO2 tax would be not effective, which is exactly what this paper said the contrary, and that it would be socially unjust. I see this statement in the room without dissent, and I think this is where we in science have to be more clear, and where we have to find ways to get to larger parts of society. And my second point is talking about internalizing external costs, and I think we have to be honest about that, and this means that we have to raise CO2 tax to the costs that actually are happening because of climate change. And these are high costs. So we start with 180, so it would be at least 180 euros per ton of CO2 from current UBA data. And if you don't take a discount rate in there, it would be even 640 euros per ton. So we have to be honest about that, and we can't lose time. Obviously, we won't start with that because this would be pretty disturbing, but we have to reach this price pretty soon in order to get transformations fast enough and in order to internalize these costs. And the second thing we have to do is cut fossil subsidies. And don't cut them, don't make a plan how to cut them in 10 years, but cut them now. Because most of them could be cut within short time. And I think these two measures are extremely important. And I think the focus on acting now is so important.
Thank you. Yeah, now, give the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jens Oelstegel. I'm a systems architect who has reduced his full-time employment 9 years ago in order to do energy-efficient algorithms research. And I have two comments. One is on the top-down thing. Yeah? You're right, we need goals, we need measures, and maybe we lack also knowledge about which measures, but many measures we know, and they are with you. And I agree with you that without governmental action, the top-down measures will not be implemented. So we all know that we eat too much meat, that we drive too heavy cars, that we go past vacations on cruise ships that we shouldn't do, and it's a matter of political decisions to quickly reduce that. So I'm completely with you. Sorry?
But who does really doubt that?
But it does not happen.
Why doesn't it happen? Please take the microphone if you want to answer. Mrs. Bulmahn, please take your microphone if you want to.
No, I asked who doubts this? Of course it's clear that the government has to take measurements, but it's the parliament who decides. So you have to organize a majority in the parliament, of course. As a minister, you can't decide anything on small things. The major decisions are taken in the parliament. So you have to make sure that there is a majority in the parliament for these measurements. I'm very much in favor of that. So I think it's to be honest, I think it's worthless to discuss, government against individual behavior. We need both. I agree with you. Both.
Okay, we have a question over here.
We were talking about the great political developments we're making in the last 15, 20 years and so on. To me, it's not so clear that we're making so much development, to be honest. In the year 2018, last year alone, we lost 20,000 jobs in the wind industry alone. It's about the same when we talk about the solar energy. So we see huge stagnation there or even regressing. In those kind of industries, which is not like a clear sign to those kind of industries that we want to put much development in them. So Germany's role is pretty contradictory on like lots of issues there. Why is the government not massively subsidizing those alternative economies we were talking about, instead of subsidizing fossil fuel and building new pipelines? And why they don't sanction those kind of CO2 emitting industries? I think one of the major problems, and that's my first question is that there is still a huge dependence between the politics and lobbyism, especially when it comes to car lobby, agricultural lobby. So how is politics able to break up this vicious cycle when it comes to lobbyism? Like, until today, there's no register officially available of how many lobbyists have access to the Bundestag. Why is that so? Why are we still refusing to make it more transparent, political decisions more transparent to the public? Why has the industry still so much influence on that? That's my first question. Second question is that we have a problem between left-wing and right-wing populism, right? So I assume that most of the people sitting in this room here are liberal left-wing people. So I don't come originally from this town. I come from the very south of this country, which is pretty rich. Most of my people, of my friends, they still live there. They earn good money. They have good salaries, but still they drive big cars. They eat meat, and like in this bubble, it is pretty easy to talk about development and how much we can do and so on. But in the end of the day, like you mentioned, we need majorities for all that, right? So how are we able to quickly achieve majorities in the middle of society so that we reach like all of the population? Because we need all of the population to agree at least on like a general consensus on what to do with climate change. And I think this is the most important issue, because as long as we don't have majorities for all that, like governments or parties will still only serve conservative needs and opinions. So those are the two questions.
I can answer the first question very, very quickly. My own party already brought in three laws in order to establish a lobby register. I myself have supported that since 15 years or even more, but you need to have a majority on one hand in Parliament, and in a coalition your hands are bound in a way. That is a problem. So if you look at the, I would say, at the Parliament, there are three parties against a lobby register. That is the Christian Democratic Party, the Liberal Party, and the AfD. The others are in favor of it. And I totally agree. I think that's crucial, and we should have done that already a long time ago. You're right.
Mr. Edenhofer, thank you.
I have a question to you. Are you from Bavaria? Baden-Württemberg. Okay, okay. I'm from Bavaria, so it's almost the same. But from the Berlin's perspective. So when we are in the south, so together, so we fight against each other. So, but what I would like to say is, so I'm coming from Bavaria, so in a very, very conservative pocket there, very, very black. And I'm living for 30 years outside Bavaria, so I'm a Bavarian in exile. But what's quite interesting in Bavaria is, so last year the Conservative Party, the CSU, ran a campaign which was basically a very ridiculous campaign against the refugees, against the Greens, against all sorts of things. Now, do you remember who the party leader was at this time? The name was Mr. Söder. It was the old Mr. Söder. If you look at the new Mr. Söder, so he is basically pushing even the Green Party, right, all the time. And what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that basically the campaign against the refugees didn't pay off. And he meanwhile realizes that even in the most conservative parts of our society, people feel that sustainability is a deeply conservative issue. And I fully agree with you. It would be a deep, deep mistake to frame the climate crisis as a kind of a left-wing project which only the left-wing people in a bubble are interested in, right? So in that sense, but here I have a lot of hope. So 1 year ago I thought, my God, what's going on in Bavaria, this is terrible. But now meanwhile, Mr. Söder has transformed himself completely. So the same basically is I'm now living in Brandenburg. And I tell you, in the Brandenburg area, this coal phase out, this is a very thorny and a very important issue. And I'm deeply surprised that the Brandenburg government didn't tell the people a compelling story. The compelling story for Brandenburg would be to say, listen, coal will be phased out anyway. Even without climate change, we have a lot of overcapacities in Europe, so coal will be phased out. And I bet after the election, the LEAG and the Lausitz will announce a plan which they will phase out coal far before the 2038 date. He could say the Coal Commission gives us the opportunity to raise the money for a reasonable policy which benefits the people. So this would be a compelling story instead of saying, I promise you, we will always have coal in the Lausitz. And this is a way, what we could learn, so I'm reluctant to say we should learn from Bavaria, but sometimes it's true, we should learn a little bit from them how to deal with the right-wing populists. And this is a very smart way, and I would like to emphasize it is very important to understand that the climate crisis is too important that just the more left-wing liberal people take advantage from that.
And we have quite a few questions, so please keep your answers short. Thank you, so we can take more questions. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, thank you for a very engaging panel and for reminding us of the power of politics. And of course, we have plenty of evidence of that because politics has been very effective in protecting certain sectors within the economy, for example. So how about getting back to a role of politics in setting an ethical framework to protect people and the planet? Because that's actually, if you read Adam Smith's Moral Sentiments, what he intended when he said that there needs to be a framework of compassion within which the market then can work as an effective allocation mechanism. But it's nothing more than an allocation mechanism. And so it takes political will to set that ethical framework. And of course, the effectiveness has been much more on the protectionist side than on setting the ethical framework side. Oh, by the way, and I live in Washington, D.C.
Interesting question. Who wants to answer? Yeah, I mean...
Just shortly, I would fully agree with that, because I do think we need a foundation for developing a new economic system, and none of us knows really how this is going to work, you know, particularly given the certain circumstances and given how the system operates. But I do think we need an emotional anchor, and that emotional anchor needs to be linked to the global commons. And it needs to be linked to, I don't know, Johan Rockström spoke about kind of the basics, the biosphere. It needs to be linked to those, you know, you could call it a life support system, but it also needs to be linked to the human heart and to the essential, I believe, existing nature, human nature of taking care. And I do think that would do a big job in naming an emotionally compelling ethical framework and which could be scaled from local to global or global to local.
Thank you. And we've had someone in the second row for some time. Yeah. See you.
Yeah, we talked about Söder and his sudden love for environmental protection, but what concerns me even more is that many politicians right now suddenly discovered that after the EU election. And how can we know that that isn't just reactionism to the voters' results? Because if I look at Andreas Scheuer and what he's doing in the Ministry of Transportation right now, which is just setting taxes for the train lower and everything else, but it just doesn't feel right. Like he's not really doing it because he has real motives behind it, but he's just doing it to get more voters. How can we be sure that this is not just a temporary thing, but politicians are actually behind it? And especially in our coalition, as we saw with the SPD, that in the beginning wasn't really for the end of coal that much because of many jobs that would be lost, but now suddenly is completely for it. How can we be sure that this is actually going to last for a longer time and it's not just temporarily to win some voters?
Yeah, I mean, we can collect a few statements, but then if someone feels he or she wants to directly answer now.
I'm not very sure if I understood your question right, because the acoustic is not very good when you sit up here. The question whether we should transform our economy to a CO2-free economy as a goal, and I know that of course we always use some CO2, is a discussion in the Social Democratic Party for a long time. we had already this discussion in the 80s, and it has continued. So there were always, part of it was always in favor of keeping coal, and the other part was not in favor of keeping coal as an energy source, where we agree that you have to undertake this change in a way that it's socially responsible, and I think that is important. And socially responsible does not mean that you don't do it, but you do it in such a way that regions and have the opportunity to change their industry and to make sure that not for example 30 or 40% of the population are without any income. That's a point where we are talking about. So I think the compromise which has been found is a way to do it. I personally think we need more money for that, to be honest. I think that's not enough in order to transform the economy in those regions. So it will be more costly, but I'm willing to bring up this cost, because I think it's important to do it and not to say it's too costly, that's why we can't do it. And I think there is a majority in my party for that. There will be always some single people in parties, and I think that you have to accept that. That is true for the Social Democratic Party, but that is, for example, true for the Christian Democratic Party. That's also true for the CSU. I know that is also true for the Left Party and even for the Green Party.
Mrs. Bulmahn, we wanted to keep the answers short.
Who are not in favor of such a transformation. But the question is, what is a majority? That is the important point. And I think that there is a majority for this transformation.
Okay, Sebastian, quick statement, so we can take a couple more questions.
I think this is the obligation of society. This is the obligation of the individual to push parties to act. And this is by voting for parties which focus most on environment and climate, and which propose most climate action, and which act, when in power, most according to climate action. And so this is the real obligation of the voter, to talk to friends, to family, to all, to build up pressure on politics to act.
And I guess you're preaching to the converted. I mean, as he said, you need to reach these people that we probably have not talked to yet.
Sure, but this is how to keep this system running, that even CSU compels to more ambitious climate laws, and perhaps even more ambitious than a lot of left politicians. And this is how to keep this system running and how to get to 1.5-degree pathway.
All right. More questions. We have one there. He's been waiting for some time. Yeah.
One point, because you get the word. I think it's so important to push this not only topic, but to push this question, because it's not only a question of survival of the future generations, but at the moment we have a window of opportunity. Because not only of your movement, which I think is very, very important, because people change their behavior if their own children step them on their foot. That's the most important, and step them on their feet. That's the most important point. But another point is aspect, and we should keep that in mind. I think many people realize that also people living in Germany are affected by climate change. They didn't realize that 10 years ago. But now, because of 2 hot summers, it's crazy, but that's the case, realize they are also affected. And now they are discussing for the first time in Germany about shortage of water. And there is the emotional approach. You rightly pointed out, it's not an intellectual approach, it's an emotional approach. And so that's why I think it's so important to use this window of opportunity. Now we have the chance to organize majorities for these changes. And we have to take this window of opportunity and not to wait 5 or 6 years.
Okay. Thank you for waiting.
I'm going to ask a very quick question. I really like your idea, Mr. Edenhofer, about justice. You said it's a time for justice and social justice. But don't you think maybe it would be better to say it's a time for global justice, not only at the national level, but at a global level? Maybe to use between the developing countries and the developed countries, or global north or global south. And maybe it's the time to change our mind about how to even compensate for the all over-exploitation of the commons. It's you talk about measures, like how we should think about measures, but in this collective action problem, maybe it's not feasible to say, to formulate measures for global south, to say what you should you should do there. So how do you think about that collective action? And by the way, I'm from global south.
No, you are absolutely right. But the interesting thing and the nice thing is that in the Paris Agreement, at least, we have institutions for that. And not well-functioning institutions, of course, but I would like to highlight one, which is the Green Climate Fund. And the idea is that the Green Climate Fund should support countries from the global south to kick off a transformation process. My feeling is that the Green Climate Fund has to be reformed and even transformed fundamentally because it's not functioning well. But at least we have an institution which allows to support countries who are willing to start with the transformation process. In the end, I could go on with a few details, and if you're interested, I'm happy to send you a few papers which we have written. But the fundamental principle is quite clear, that we need such an institution. And so now we are approaching the end, and so I say something which could induce some hope. The Green Climate Fund and even the climate negotiations survived, despite of Donald Trump, despite of the severe attacks against multilateralism. And this is an interesting and I would say a development which can create a lot of hope, because this basically is a way how we can, I'm not saying we can implement global justice, but we could go direct steps in that direction.
I would like to add, just kind of quoting my good friend Ernst von Weizsäcker, honorary president of the Club of Rome, that there are thoughts of that. He's a very strong promoter of saying the global commons need to have a price tag, and most of the global commons, or what would be contributing to saving our climate, is in developing countries. And if these countries, if money kind of is transferred to these countries for keeping these global commons intact, and with that money they could do development that doesn't need to copy Western development, that is maybe linked to climate-friendly development, that would be a great move. I think he's been trying to suggest this since years, but it is such a contentious political global issue, and it really needs politicians to acknowledge that the global commons could really contribute to saving the climate crisis if there is a kind of mechanism for that.
Okay, we'll take one last question because we're almost out of time. So many of you still want to, okay, up there, still want to ask the question. And we're running a little late here.
Hi, Ms. Künkel. I have a question directly directed at you, but whoever wants to reply can also reply. You have mentioned that you went to your municipality and they did not really have a clue about how to act in case of a climate crisis. I know the same thing from my municipality, which is a really small town in northern Brandenburg, really rural, and very occupied with other problems like ravens in the city. So what do you think is actually missing for those municipalities to take on a climate crisis plan? Do you think it's the political framework within the Landesregierung and the governance structures that are established? Do you think it's a lack of interest from the population? Or what do you think are the main drivers that it has not happened and the main drivers that could make it happen on a national, regional and local scale?
I say clearly, number one, there is not coming a framework from top down, which should be in place. There should be just no municipality can do without a climate crisis. Where the problem is, of course, forcing people isn't only going to do the job. Maybe then it's a bureaucratic climate crisis plan that doesn't have teeth. So in addition to that, the question is what kind of incentive systems municipalities could have. So could the politics create incentive systems for climate friendly or climate or carbon neutral or whatever, kind of strategies in municipalities. So it would be directives, but it would also be incentive systems. And the second thing is that I do believe that, like you say, my municipality, Mecklenburg, they have so many other problems, apart from debts and, kind of lots of stuff and right-wing populism, without the support from the local civil society, it's not going to work. And you need a new identification, and you need to build networks of people that support the municipality. So I think it's an element of different levels of action.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's an interesting question, and I think I can add something from my research to that question. So I think it's not that municipalities are not engaged and that they're not doing anything, but they're doing this in the routines they have. So they have their forums where they meet, where they engage, and there's just no one who has the mean to put the topic as a topic on the table. So who makes the topic a topic? Is already a question that is not answered. And then what routines? So they meet a lot and they're a lot engaged in the rural areas. So there's many people who have like different functions at the same time. They're very engaged and they have ideas, but it's very difficult to get people out of their routines so that those who are necessary to cooperate and to develop an idea, where should they go and how do they organize themselves so that they meet. So there's no forum where they meet and no incentive that someone feels the legitimization to initiate such a process and then to organize this. So this is the big gap. It's not that there's a blame to be made to the people.
Sebastian, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would like to say a few general words at the end of this panel because I think really a big issue is that the voice of science is not being heard at the moment, and it's not heard even although we are protesting since 8 or 9 months now in Germany. And so I think what is crucial is that you engage, that you go to social media, comment statements of politicians that are totally wrong on the climate crisis. This is crucial. I'm no fan of acting on social media either, but it has such a big impact, and it has such a big impact if scientists do this. I see the AfD stating they want a science-based climate policy. What went wrong that we can have such statements in the room without having strong dissents? So I think you should all engage more on social media and in the public. This might not be a very fun task to do, but I think it's very important. And of course, show in public how important the issue is, and perhaps join us at the 20th of September.
I assume that everyone in this room has marked this date down in their calendar. So I'm sorry if we can't take any more questions. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Let's just take a second to appreciate this wonderful visual recording of Bettina Schmidt and just take a look at some of the things that we discussed, change and challenges, obvious things, the measures that we need to implement, and different areas. I see a magnifying glass analyze our daily lives, definitely the behavior question, and whether politicians or science or the civil society is responsible for changing stuff. So I told you I was going to ask you another question at the end. So let me ask you, do you believe that not only after this discussion, but also after the past couple of days that you've experienced and how you see society, science, and politics, do you think that we will take action in time whatever that means for you, please raise your hand. Do I see hands? A few optimistic hands? Okay, yes. He raises 2 hands, yeah. Okay. Mr. Edenhofer, you're not optimistic enough to raise your hand? Okay. Then let me ask you a second question. Are you motivated to take action personally? That's what I wanted to see. Yes, excellent. So with this, I would like to thank our panel for participating, for coming here today and staying for 2 hours in this heat. It wasn't easy. Thank you very much. And thanks, of course, once again to Barbara Schneider. And I will now give the word to your host, Christoph Schneider.
Thank you, Martin Kloss. This has been a wonderful debate. It has so perfectly rounded up this cool conference event over the last 2 days. And I'm happy to see that putting together all these conference formats and letting them end with a public debate, which is actually not quite the end, has been working out so nicely. So thank you again for making the show tonight, Martin Kloss. It has been wonderful having you here. Ladies and gentlemen, this conference is named from Alexander von Humboldt's KOSMOS to the sustainability challenges, to the sustainability transformation in the 21st century. And I think we have been going along this way on this journey quite a bit in the last 2 days. It has been wonderful with you. And my bottom line, basically now, as we are having this subtitle for the public debate, From Knowledge to Action, my answer on this, which I have heard several times somehow in statements on this conference, and even tonight here in the public debate, is from hope to courage. And I really hope, no, I'm sure that we are having the courage to go there. And we don't need hope because we're acting now and we do this courageously and bravely. That's what I wish for us. Yeah? I would like to thank a couple of people. Before I do this, I should announce that the 2 vouchers for a free open access peer-reviewed science publication with Frontiers in Earth Systems, we have been awarding to the talk Analyzing the Food, Energy, Water Nexus in Germany, Insights from Current Resource Management, to Caroline Merker from the Forschungszentrum Jülich. And the second of those 2 vouchers that we have been given by Frontiers to support this conference, we are awarding to Mining the Anthropocene in the context of circular economy aiming for sustainable development, to Vivek Jazre Mohandas from the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy, and also he is a fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung. My congratulations. Besides reminding you on the 20th of September, I would also wish to remind you that there is this Berlin KOSMOS conference invocation on sustainable transformation that we have set up, and you are still welcome to sign this statement downstairs at the registration desk, or just drop us a line by email and we add you then to the signatories. We are not putting names in public, but we're just counting how many of the attendees of this conference have agreed on this statement, and it will be a press release by Humboldt-Universität on Monday to bring this to the public. So you're very well, you're very much encouraged to have a look at this statement, and if you think it's worthy to support, please sign in. Then my big thank you. It has been a little bit of work to run this conference, but it has been so much fun, and the fun is because behind all of this there is a great team, and they have been acting for many, many months, and especially in the last weeks with, well, probably with much more effort than they would have thought they could invest. Before I'm having some people coming on stage, I would first want to thank Mercator Stiftung for their generous contribution. Without their financial support, we would not have been able to run this conference. I'm sure you have been enjoying working with our student coaches, with the facilitators of the Treasure Quest. I think this has been a good experience for many of you, and I would again ask all the coaches in the room to stand up. I know that they're not all of them here, but please, those coaches, those student facilitators that are here, please stand up. Besides IRE Thesis and the Department of Geography, the central units of this university have supporting this event in a dedicated and outstanding way. And I wish to name two people that have been really at the foremost frontier to get this conference on stage. And I'm not sure whether Boris Nietzsche is in the room. He's not, but I see that Lena Streckert is here. She tries to hide behind her smartphone, but that doesn't work. Please come up on the stage and let me say thank you to you. And please accept the flowers for Boris as well. So for Boris Nietzsche, bring him to the office. I know you share the office, so you can bring it to him on Monday, please. Yeah. There are a number of students, student research assistants. Without them, I would never been able to do this. And the first person, please come on stage, is which I would want to have had on stage Zoe, and she's not a student research assistant, but she's the communication officer of the IRE Thesis, that is Anne Dombrowski. And at the beginning of the conference, I told you that unfortunately for health reasons, she was not able to join us on this conference. But we have someone else here, which as a stand-in for Anne Dombrowski may have the flowers, and this is Bettina König. Because Bettina, she's part of the science board of this conference. So she's a member of the science board, and she's a good colleague of Anne. Thank you very much. At the same time, representing everybody at IRE Thesis, like Olof Krüger and Jeanette Latino and Axel Klee and all the others that have helped so much in the last months. And then finally, let's have the students here on stage. And I would want to join me on stage now. Nora Wehling, please come up here. Our fantastic Nora. Hey, come, stay up here, stay up here. You don't go down again. Steffi Elsholz, please come upstage. And last but not least, David. Come on, David Steger, the guy behind the emails. This is the team, and this has been the conference, and it has been wonderful having you here. I hope you join us downstairs for a farewell drink, and then hopefully enjoy the music by Lotte Ahoy. Conscious Madness is her label, and I would hope that she kind of encourages you to take a step further with her music. And then have a safe trip home. And I sincerely hope that you had fun and that you have learned something here and that you bring forward science and that we move from hope to courage. Thank you and goodbye.